Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you've taken your time to be with us this time around. In this episode number 67, good guest again, as always, Dale Romans, multiple winner of big races, ranging from the Preakness all the way to the Dubai World Cup. We'll talk with him in just a few moments and about getting back in business at Churchill. And then later on, a very talented writer with the Thoroughbred Daily News. He's covered the sport for decades. Bill Finley will be joining us. That coming up. As always, on lead guitar, we have Ben Chaffins. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Kenny.
And our researcher, Mr. Thomas Kenny. How are you, Mr. Thomas?
Doing great.
Throughout all this, horse racing has been around. Now, it's been stopped. It started back some places like it was at Turfway Park in Kentucky. Now it opens up on Saturday, again at Churchill Downs, 2 weeks after what would have been Derby Day. In between, Arkansas had their Derby a week ago. Florida was running. So horse racing has been the only major sport that's gone on during this whole thing, with the exception of over the weekend, the UFC got back in business. But Thomas, you've been doing some research on some other sports that may be coming around soon.
That's right, Kenny. You know, a lot of the major sports have understandably stopped competition, and they're looking to reopen as soon as possible. But reopening can take a lot of different forms. That can mean playing without fans. That can mean multiple teams playing in the same spot, as is the case with the MLB is looking to do. A lot of reports are saying that Major League Baseball is looking to get a lot of teams to play regular season games in the same vein of Arizona spring training, where there's a few stadiums all within 50 miles of each other, which allows the teams to quarantine in a single hotel. We've also got the NBA, which is looking to open without fans, open practice facilities as early as May 8th. And the PGA Tour is also looking to reopen, which makes sense seeing how golf is more of a solitary sport. You know, you can have one person on the tee at a time. And it looks like they're opening the Ryder Cup as early as September 25th in Wisconsin.
So we're getting back into business slowly but surely. And of course, the NFL has announced their schedule. Churchill Downs has opened back up now. The horses started arriving on Monday of this week. Dale Romans is a Louisville native. He grew up there. His father's a successful trainer, and Dale has followed in his footsteps. So it's home for him. This means a lot to him. You guys know what it's like when you get to go back home, don't you? It's always kind of nice.
Oh, yeah.
It's nothing quite like that feeling.
Yeah. So we'll talk to Dale when we come back about Churchill opening, about what's going on in his stable, that and more. Stay with us. This is the Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for tuning in this week, whether you're listening to us on YouTube, on the radio, on your Google Play or iTunes, or also Stitcher and iHeartRadio. We're everywhere. This man has been everywhere. He's been a friend for a long time. Well-respected, multiple stakes winning trainer. Dale Romans joins us. Dale, how are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to be on the show.
Glad to have you on, and glad to have you back home. You're just getting back in Louisville, and Churchill Downs is just getting back in business. And what's all this been like for you, trying to get your stable ready and moving back and forth right now?
You know, if you look at the big picture, Kenny, I've been fortunate and lucky. We've been able to keep running in Florida, and so we've been able to keep the horses doing a little something, bringing in a little bit of revenue. And, you know, again, if you look at the big picture, I realize any problems I have are luxury problems. With that being said, over the years, I've gotten spoiled, and I pout about my luxury problems. And so there's no place in the world like Kentucky in the spring, especially around Derby time. And to miss a year of that has been difficult.
I was there 2 weeks ago doing a brief report for NBC when they used their Derby special showing the 2015 Pharaoh Derby. And just being on the backside and not seeing any Barnsdale, that was just, I mean, not seeing anybody in the barns, you know, horses, people, or anything. That was just like almost like a science fiction movie. It's really eerie, you know?
It is. I mean, even going back there, I've been back there many times in my life when the backside was closed or horses are out of town and you knew they were coming. and it's even weird, eerie then. But to be there in May and not see a horse or a person, I can't imagine what that'd be like.
What's it going to be like? Well, you've already experienced this. What's it like to be racing where it's just basically you and the horse? And I don't know, but you bring a groom over and there's nobody in the stands, because you've already experienced this, I guess, in Florida and Arkansas.
Well, it's a funny thing you ask that, because a lot of times, especially on the weekends or night racing, when people getting a little bit of liquor, I think, man, get me out of here. Everybody wants to know a horse to bet on or something. I said, it'll drive you crazy. But I've been going to the race at Gulfstream, man. It's so around. I started looking for somebody to come up and ask me for a tip. I realized that's part of the things I love, is interacting with the people at the racetrack. And it's you got to the point down there where I didn't even want to go to the races, because you sit at home, watch your horse run, and there's just nobody to interact with, nobody to celebrate with, none of the the energy, the fuels. Everybody works on the racetrack.
And, with the way everything's gone, and I know everything's still speculating, talk about maybe Keeneland may have some summer racing, something looking for the 2-year-olds where they might fit in. Do you have any idea? Are you hearing anything that you feel, might give you some hope that there's some other places in the next few months where horses can get back in? You can also race at other places.
Well, yeah, right now, as long as Kentucky's running, I'm happy. But I'll tell you what it's going to do for Churchill Downs if you look at it. First of all, anybody that can predict what's going to happen in the future right now is just crazy. It's, we got to realize we're in a very fluid environment. I just hope it doesn't get shut down where we are running. And then with Ellis Park and Keeneland, that kind of stuff will all get worked out. And then hopefully it'll get worked out in a very positive way for everybody. But nobody knows what's gonna happen in the future.
Some trainers have said, well, if you have to try to find a positive out of this, there's a few horses out there that probably have benefited from it not being the first Saturday in May. If you had a Derby horse, that maybe it'll be better to give them a few more months to get ready for that. You buying into that?
Well, I mean, I would buy into it, but if you ask Barkley Tag, that's a negative. He said it gives time for everybody to catch up to it. So it depends on who you are, whether that's a positive or negative. But I will say one positive from Churchill. They just had a draw for opening day like you've never seen. Every race was packed full. There's every jockey in the country, basically, who's who, is going to be riding at Churchill Downs. Every trainer in the country is trying to get into Kentucky or run their horses here. They don't know how long California can stay around. New York, who knows when they're going to open. I know they keep putting dates out there, but we went through 4 dates, I think, before we could open here. And so Churchill, it's going to be a gangbuster meet. I mean, you can't go out there and play, but everybody ought to be that's into racing. I'll be hooked on TVG and Twin Spires and playing some really good horse racing.
Yeah, I guess John Sadler's among those that's going to be coming from California into Churchill this year, which is not his standard move in the spring.
No, it isn't. It is not his move. He's California through and through, and it'd be good to have him here. But, like Rudy Rodriguez called me yesterday, wanted to know if I could help him run a couple of horses when he entered. He was actually just kind of going to ship out of New York. And Johnny Velasquez, Joel Rosario, they're all going to be here.
Well, you're kind of like the tour guide. One of the great stories I remember when Animal Kingdom won the 2011 Derby, and you had Shackelford that year, who, of course, went on to win the Preakness. But weren't you the guy that led Graham Motion to the winner's circle or showed him how to get down there?
Yeah, I showed him how to get back to the racetrack. That's funny. I was just telling somebody that story a couple of days ago, and I think you guys actually used the footage leading up to the Preakness, and then we ran 1-2 in the Preakness. And Graham and I have become really good friends, and I think it started that day. That's a good story. Everybody's watching the horses run at Churchill, and of course the race. Everybody's watching them come back. Well, we go down under, as a trainer, your horse runs. You go back under the grandstand, and you start walking down to the racetrack. There was nobody back there. That's like a ghost town because everybody's watching the show, and Graham has tears in his eyes. And he's going the wrong way. And I yelled at him. I said, "Hey, buddy, congratulations." So we had a little hug. And I said, "You're going the wrong way." He said, "This is your house. Show me how to get there." And he grabbed the back of my sport coat, and I led him through the little crowd that was there right to the racetrack. I said, "Now go get your Derby winner."
Man, that's a great story. He's told me that story, too. And I remember I interviewed both of you. If you remember, we sat on a bench in the paddock before the Belmont Stakes, and you were both there, and you told that story again.
Yeah. And then after that, I mean, we just became really good friends. And we've got a lot in common, and our daughters are friends, and families are friends. And he's a good man. It's a good family.
Talking with Eclipse Award-winning trainer Dale Romans, a Louisvillian, happy as we all are that racing's back this week at Churchill Downs. I mean, you are so, I don't know anybody that's more Louisville than you. Your father, Jerry, well-respected. I think you've been at the track since you were a baby, haven't you, Dale?
The barn we're in right now at Churchill Downs, my mother says she walked me in to pet a horse when I was 9 months old. And
Wow.
so I've been there quite a while.
Now, that's history.
Yeah, and I can't wait to drive over there in the morning if they'll let me in and go sit at my desk for a few hours and catch up on my Kentucky work.
Well, now, how's the stable looking right now? Who all's going to be coming to Churchill for you? Mr. Freeze, saw him out there recently in the Oaklawn Handicap. Sally's curling this year, picks up a win for you. Just tell me a little bit about how the stable's going right now, Dale.
It's not going bad. Mr. Freeze will be back. He's coming here, and we'll have Dennis's moment. I still have high hopes for him. He's going to be coming in attachment rate. It's probably our best horse trying to make the Derby. He's one who would benefit from pushing it back. And promises fulfilled. His training at Windstar Farm. As soon as they let me, I'm bringing him back in.
Well, it's been some incredible runs. I tell you, Mr. Freeze, that's a heck of a Oaklawn Handicap, I thought. That was an interesting race out there. I watched that last week or 2 weeks ago.
That's a much better race than people see.
Yeah.
If he would have broke on lead and finished third, then I would have felt bad about it. But, he didn't show his normal speed for some reason, and he got stuck behind horses, and he still kicked home and tried to win. I was very impressed with him.
Talking about Dennis's moment, I felt for you being there last year at the start of that Breeders' Cup. I don't know what's worse, to get beat in the final jump of a race or to have a really talented horse like you do in Dennis's moment who couldn't even get in the race because of a bad start.
Yeah, that was funny. That was a bad day. That was about the worst day I've ever had in a race. I'll tell you, it's my 2 worst days in racing without catastrophic injuries aside. You can't compare those things. But with Shackelford did the same thing. When he was even money for the mile, I didn't think there was a horse in there could get within 10 lengths of it. And he stumbled out of the gate and spotted him 5 or 6 lengths. And, of course, Breeders' Cup mile, you're not going to catch those horses when you give them a head start. And he ended up not hitting the board. I was sitting in the breezeway of the paddock where the horses come on and off the racetrack with my son was next to me, Jacob. There's a picture somebody took of us. And I'm telling you, I was in the lowest of lows when Shackelford stumbled. And Jake says to me, we got another chance. We got another chance. And it was little Mike when I'm trying to make you go a mile and a half. And I'm thinking to myself, the way things are going, he can't get a mile and a half. And don't you know, an hour later, we won the Breeders' Cup turf.
I remember little Mike. That's one of my favorites of your horses.
Yeah. So that's one of the great things about the game. I mean, you may have feathers one day, but you'll have chicken the next.
And speaking of which, another great Dale Romans moment was after the Belmont in 2011, and you come back to the Garden City Hotel with pizzas, which was fun. It was much better than going out to the fancy dining places, and it was just fun, and I think a perfect moment.
That was one of the best nights I've ever had, and it was because of the guys I was with. Not to mention I was with some of the most famous sportscasters in the history of the world. And we sat in the basement of the Garden City Hotel and talked about sports and the coverage that you guys have given over the years. And that was one of my favorite times ever after a race.
Well, what I always like about you is like you say, you understand because you grew up in the game, and it's going to be highs and lows. And, I'm always amazed at you and all the trainers, how you can handle those things, even though you're used to it. I don't think it makes it easier. And having a moment like that, even a small moment, can be a big deal.
It can be. And the little things you learn as you get older in life, I don't care what aspect of life you're in, but those little things and those little pop-up events that happen will always be your favorite moments. And, don't get me wrong. I've gone through stretches where I couldn't find a race, and I come home and sit in a dark room with a pizza. A lot of times, people don't see that part of all of us. But basically, overall, you got to realize it'll shine again tomorrow.
We're talking with Dale Romans. Stay with us. More coming up with Dale here on the Horse Racing Show right after this. And welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for tuning in. Really glad to have a friend and just an outstanding trainer who's been doing it since I think he was about 18 years old, Dale Romans, who has had such great horses as Roses in May, a Dubai World Cup winner, Patio Prado. We talked about Little Mike, and then there's First Dude, and another one, Dale Keen Ice, who won the Travers over that horse named American Pharaoh. That was another highlight moment, I thought.
Yeah, that's another one. That was another one in my life. It was a major highlight. And, that's one for the history books. That's one, they ask me all the time, what's the biggest race, the best race, your most exciting race? And like I told him the other day on an interview, my probably most exciting race was my first win ever, Mace 3500 at Turfway Park, February 15, 1987. I was as excited as I could have possibly ever gotten at that time. But Keen Ice beating American Pharaoh, there's no doubt, it's my most historical victory. And that's one people will be talking about years from now.
And, so many others out there. That Dubai World Cup with Roses in May in 2005. And, what I think what makes it special is when you go, wow, I didn't realize it was that long, because that memory's so vivid for me, and I'm sure for you as well.
It is. It's just amazing that there is that kind of distance between it. I don't know. You get up and go to work every day, you do the same thing every day, tell the same stories every day. It seems like yesterday that we were in Dubai, and I needed that win to pay my rent, and the big horse came through for me.
Well, so it's down to you can't let yourself think, right? Like, what if that hadn't happened? You got to just savor the moment, I guess.
You stay in the moment. That's the way you live your life, in the moment. Doesn't matter what you're doing again. Live in the moment. The moment is never as bad as what you sit around and worry about the future's going to be. And so, especially in our game, where you're judged daily, sometimes hourly, depending on how many races you're running, you can't. Like Steve Asmussen told me one time, he said, "We know what our problem is. We can go to the races and have 10 horses in, win 3 races, 7 people are mad at us." So you're much better off if you're just living in the moment. You can't think about the negatives that could happen. You would never leave the house.
that is so true, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
It's like I don't say what my dad's always told me. You could do 99 good things for somebody, but the one time you couldn't come through for them is the time they remember.
Right. I just heard I saw a thing somebody sent me. It says, "Why don't people gossip about the good things?"
That is right, isn't it? Nobody wants to talk about that.
I guess that's not fun.
Well, getting back to Dennis's moment for a moment here, there's with this, would he be one of those horses that's going to benefit maybe from a September weekend Derby?
I think it'd be an outside thing. Now we decided we gave him a little freshener, turned him out. He'll be back here in a month or so. So that'd be probably a push to get him there. But we're looking for something in the fall. There's still a Breeders' Cup out there. There's a lot of stuff coming up, and he'll be back running.
When you look at the Derby, and I think race fans were excited that at least Churchill was the first on the Triple Crown Trail to make a statement. We're going on the first Saturday in September. There is hope, of course, that fans will be able by that stage, maybe everyone, maybe at least partial, at least there'll be racing and there will be a Kentucky Derby. How important was that for Churchill to make that kind of statement early?
Well, I mean, you got to go out and do it. You have to be bold. Again, just step out and be bold and set your goals high now. Well, I think they'll run the Derbies first Saturday, September. Now the question is, will we have fans? And I hope we do. I hope that the energy's there.
Do you hear anything about the other two? I mean, they're still waiting word on, there's been rumor that the Preakness might be in October. Nothing from Belmont right now. Do you think, in other words, Dale, we're going to have a traditional Triple Crown of Derby, Preakness, and Belmont this year? It'll fall in that order.
I don't really know, and I don't think it matters. I don't think anything's traditional about this year in any sport or any activity, any industry. And I hope that one of the biggest things, we eradicate this virus and move on so that we can have a traditional future. Now, the problem is the Belmont, in my opinion. First of all, who knows when New York will actually be up and running? They're hit harder than anybody else in the country by far, or in the world. So who knows when racing is really going to be on Governor Cuomo's radar. But the big other problem is running a mile and a half. It's harder to cut a horse back And that's a distance they're never going to run again after they do it 99% of them. So it's the strategically placing it is the toughest. If you go later than October or early October, September, then you're messing with the horses turning around and trying to go a mile and a quarter in a Breeders' Cup. If you take it out of sequence with the Derby or Preakness, how many horses would want to run there? And then try to step backwards in distance. And I think that's the hardest thing that they're going to have to do is place the Belmont.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, as you know, that's a daunting task at any time. I mean, that's a daunting task at any time, much less trying to run it before everything else. Yeah. How do you freshen up a horse to get ready either for a Breeders' Cup in 3 or 4 weeks or a mile and a half? And now do you think about a Kentucky Derby if that's the case?
Right. And there would be people that would choose that race as it stands alone as a great race. And actually, it's been one of the better races in the country for determining who will be a good stallion.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, like me, if I got a horse I think is a legitimate Derby horse, I'm not going to run a mile and a half at Belmont Park, take a chance on knocking him out and not making the Derby.
I know that Derby means a lot to anybody that's from Kentucky, and especially you. Like you say, when you were a baby, your mother was carrying you around the barn that you now have as your full-time barn there. And you know what amazed me is no Louisville trainer. I'm a guy that grew up in Louisville, has never won the Derby.
I know it. Hopefully we'll make that breakthrough. But you think about it, it's really not that amazing statistic because there's only been 140-something of them. So there haven't been that many people winning. You've got the multiple winners in there. But one of these days, hopefully there'll be one. And hopefully it will be me. I told George Weaver last year I wasn't participating. I said I always wanted to be the first Louisvillian to win it, but this year I hope you are. And he still left it open for me. He didn't get the job done either.
Yeah. I don't know if people realize just how tough that is.
It's got to be one. It has to be one of the toughest feats in sports.
Because if you look at some of the winners, and I'm not going to measure them, it's not like a knock on them. But let's face it, some of these horses, especially you see, they never won another race after that, or very few races, or had much of a career after that. They were just in that moment. They
were in the moment, and that's a lot of sports, right?
Right.
How many times would the U.S. beaten the Soviet Union if they played them 100 times?
Yes, exactly.
They were in the moment that day. And, it's the way it is. But in the big picture, if you look at the Derby and you filter it, it's amazing how it filters out the best horse most of the time.
Do you like this point system? Do you think that's helped things out a lot? I mean, because we have a string now of favorites winning the Derby that we didn't have. We had a big gap of like 20-some years before that happened until recent years.
I don't see it being the point system. I don't know why that is. I know it is a fact. But if you look at the point system and you look at the old system of earnings, there hadn't been I don't know of any contender that has been excluded that would have been able to run on the point system.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was a big change.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way because, the point system's gotten so much play lately. And I've seen where they've already readjusted, as you figure they would, what's going to be a point race and what isn't, like the Matt Wynn's now a point race at Churchill Downs this year for the Derby, which obviously would happen after the Derby in a normal year.
Right, correct. And so I don't know. It's done some things like maybe kept horses from running that weren't contenders. And I don't know how that would have affected the outcome. Maybe horses that won some 2-year-old money that weren't really changing to 3. But if you look at the statistics, if you go back and look at the point system in place, and you put the list of graded earnings next to it, you pretty much have the same 20 horses going to run at the Derby every year.
Yeah. So you'll be back at your barn, we hope, this week. You get in. Did they take your temperature and all that, Dale? Did you have to go through a procedure to get into your own barn? I'm not sure how it works.
They go further than that. They're actually, every person that goes into that backside is going to have a coronavirus test performed.
Oh.
And if you're positive, you'll be taken and put into quarantine somewhere in a hotel until you're healthy. You'll have plenty of medical supervision, and then you'll be allowed back into the population on the backside. Now, after it gets up and running, from my understanding is you are going to have your temperature taken every time you pull in the racetrack.
Wow. So you just hope that you don't get hot and sweaty, and and your temperature's up anyway, even though you're healthy.
Well, they've been doing that at Gulfstream with temperatures already, and they have a protocol in place for that. It's funny you say that because Tammy, she was in the car, had the windows up. She loves the heat. She got hot. And she's driving through, and they hit her. She was 100 degrees. So they just pulled her over the side, turn your air conditioner on, sit there 15 minutes. We'll come and check you again. And then, of course, she checks contested normal.
Well, that's good. It's good to know that there's still some common sense out there with all that's going on.
Well, being at Gulfstream now, in Florida, driving up there, I noticed we stayed over in Georgia, and then we went to stops in Tennessee, a couple spots, and then back here in Kentucky. They seem to be taking that thing a whole lot more serious in South Florida. Maybe they need to.
Yeah.
But the protocols put in place at Gulfstream, I thought that they did a very good job. They had separation. Everyone wore a mask everywhere you went. You were tested for temperatures, and it seemed like it was working real well down there.
Well, Dale, it's great to catch up with you. I'm glad that all is going well, continued success, and good health. And I look forward to the day when we can talk in person again.
And me too, Kenny. It's good to see you. And if you ever need me out here, you call anytime.
All right, my friend. Great to talk to you. Terrific trainer, Eclipse Award winner Dale Romans here. More coming up on the Horse Racing Show right after this. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for listening, be it on radio, on YouTube, listening to us on your iPad, or listening to us on iHeartRadio. It's episode 67. One of my favorite things about doing this when we started is catching up with some friends. There's some, obvious interviews you'll do with a trainer, a jockey before a big race, but just catching up with some friends like this man now, who we worked together several years ago back in the old ESPN horse racing days. I've read him for many years. He is a writer for the Thoroughbred Daily News. You can hear him on Sirius Radio with Dave Johnson talking about horse racing. He is Bill Finley. And Bill, welcome in.
Thank you, Kenny. Good to be with you.
How long has it been? I was trying to think. I remember once we were doing a Breeders' Cup steeplechase show. Remember that in Far Hills, New Jersey?
Oh, sure. Those great times at the Far Hills steeplechase.
Yes, whoever knew. And people, I'd always get confused because there's a Fair Hills, Maryland, and a Far Hills, New Jersey, and they both hosted the steeplechase periodically.
Right. And Far Hills is a huge deal, by the way. They get 50,000 people for that. So really kind of a something that most people in racing don't know much about. But in New Jersey, where I live, it's a huge deal.
It's a beautiful place. I mean, the one thing about if you only fly into Newark or you fly into Philadelphia and get the south end of Jersey, you wonder why they call it the Garden State. But if you get out and get to see it, you know why they call it the Garden State.
Yeah, I'm very proud of my state, and I hate it when people malign it. It's not all the Sopranos and Jersey Shore. It's a beautiful state, and you get away from the factories around Newark Airport, which is what everybody bases their opinions on New Jersey on, and you get to see that it really is a great place.
Trust me, Bill, being a Kentuckian, I've heard the jokes. I've heard the disparaging stereotypes for many years myself. You know how that goes. Over the years, we've covered this sport, and there's been a lot of changes, I think, in the way that horses have been trained going up to big races like the Derby. Remember in the days when if a horse only had like 2 races, 3 races before the Derby, there seemed to be something wrong. Now that seems to be the standard, throwing this year out because who knows what's going to happen between now and September.
Yeah, it's gotten that way more and more every year. And, you can go back to the days of back the 70s, 60s, 50s. I mean, horses would come into the Kentucky Derby with 16, 17 lifetime starts. And remember the big prep for the Kentucky Derby was the Derby trial. And they would run that Tuesday during Derby week. And the horses would come back on Saturday and run in the Kentucky Derby. And, it's one of those things that you wish didn't happen. It is the way things are in horse racing now. But, we're getting these horses that are so lightly raced. Get like Justify wins the Triple Crown, and they retire them after 6 career starts. And, I'm not so old that I want to be talking about the good old days so much. But, when horses used to run more often and much more often than they do now, that was better for everybody. And I also think it's better for the owners. The horses aren't racing. They're not making money. And I never quite understood, that kind of mentality, but it's caught on. And, everybody wants to have 2 months off in between races and run 5 times a year. And, Chad Brown, who's probably the number one trainer in the country right now, has done a fantastic job with his horses and uses that as his MO. So I suppose in some sense it does work, but it certainly hasn't been good for the sport.
And one thing along those lines, Bill, it's really hard for the casual audience to get hooked on a horse, as they did with American Pharoah. It's very rare to see an outstanding horse that campaigns for a whole season like we saw with him. And I'm not sure, I said on the show several weeks ago that we'll never have another Triple Crown winner win the Breeders' Cup. And so people said, that's a strong statement. I said, no, I think they'll all be like Justify if we have another Triple Crown winner immediately to the breeding shed.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. And if you look back at American Pharoah, I mean, you're still only talking about 3 races after the Belmont Stakes, but that is a huge deal. And I think now, we kind of understand maybe why he wasn't retired with all the stories that have come out about Ahmed Zayat and all his financial problems. And this is just speculation, but I think Zayat probably needed the money. And the horse was already in a deal to go off to Coolmore, and Zayat was going to collect all his racing earnings. So, it was in his best interest to keep the horse running, to put some money into his pocket, and that might be the only reason. Now, are we going to have another Kentucky Derby, Triple Crown, Belmont, Preakness winner within the next couple of years? Who knows? But I think you're right. I think that, if we do get more Triple Crown winners, until things change quite dramatically, you probably can't expect to see them all retired right after the Belmont.
Talking with Bill Finley, the Thoroughbred Daily News, you bring up Triple Crown. I don't think we're going to have the Triple Crown in the traditional Derby, Preakness, Belmont sense this year, Bill. I just don't see how it can work out with the Labor Day weekend Kentucky Derby.
No, it certainly doesn't look like it. And everybody keeps trying to figure out how this is going to work and where these races are going to go. And there doesn't seem to be any one clear, obvious path to it. I guess what you could do is you could keep the same 2 weeks, 3 weeks schedule that is traditional in Triple Crown. So if you have the Derby on the first Saturday in September, you would then go to the Preakness 2 weeks later, and then the Belmont 3 weeks after that. But that's really imperfect for a number of reasons. First of all, you got the Breeders' Cup sitting right on top of this. And you got to think that, again, talking about how horses are campaigned these days, trainers of top horses are going to be very reluctant to want to run in all these Triple Crown races, as they would ordinarily want to freshen their horses up and not have a very demanding schedule leading into the Breeders' Cup. That's number one. Number two is that I think the Derby will work well. Whether or not there's going to be fans in the stands, that remains to be seen, and I'm not sure there are going to be. But let's put that aside for the moment. If you run the Preakness 2 weeks after the Derby, you're in the middle of September, and then the Belmont would be in the first week in October. And those are not times of the year conducive to getting good crowds or drawing much attention to the races. The Belmont and Preakness are summer events. The people are out, they get out of the house, they go dress up, the kids go in the infield and drink too much. And, I would see a Belmont run in October, particularly if there's no horse going to the Triple Crown. I'm literally not sure they would get 10,000 people at that. So, these are tough decisions to be made. And, I think one thing that maybe racing needs to examine, and maybe Naira and Pimlico will take a look at this at some point, maybe you just shouldn't have those races this year. I mean, that sounds sort of sacrilegious, but, in lieu of being able to run them as you normally do, where you're going to get huge crowds and they're going to be huge money makers, they may not make a whole lot of sense.
Now, that's interesting. And, there's some old boots that are shaking out there in the horse community to even think of that, aren't there?
Yeah, I suppose. And, I imagine at the end of the day, there will be a Preakness in Belmont. But, again, where are they going to be? And look, the tracks have to think about their bottom lines. And I really cannot think of any scenario where the Maryland Jockey Club and the New York Racing Association has a particularly big payday coming to them by holding these races. And also remember that you have at both Maryland and New York, you have an added factor here that the purse accounts are going to be in trouble, because both those tracks rely, and to some extent now Churchill Downs does as well, from gaming revenues to bolster up their purses. And we're looking at the casinos around the country opening probably several months after the racetracks. because they're more conducive to the coronavirus problems. And if you're not getting the money in from the slot revenues, then you're going to have to cut purses. And when that happens, the local horsemen, the first thing they want to do is get rid of some of these big stakes races, because that gobbles up an awful lot of purse money. And, rather than Bob Baffert taking home all the money, they want it spread around among the people, in Maryland or the people in New York. So, I mean, these are all, Kenny, it's as everything we talk about in racing right now, it's all hypothetical. Everything you say has to be prefaced by if. So those are just some food for thought there.
Great insight as always from Bill Finley of the Thoroughbred Daily News. We'll be back in just a moment with more with Bill. You're listening to The Horse Racing Show. Stay with us. And welcome back to The Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you're with us. Really happy to catch up with an old friend, Bill Finley, who is with us today. Thoroughbred Daily News, Sirius Radio that he hosts with Dave Johnson. You're like always, we're still standing. We caught up yesterday, talked on the phone a bit, and here we are, Bill, 30 years later. We were kids, by the way, folks listening out there. We were kids when we started this, and it's kind of nice to still be around doing it.
Yeah, I was 4 when we first met, so now I'm only 34. How about that?
Yeah, I was 5. I was a year older than you. I remember it well, yeah. But, it is fun to look back and the people we've worked with and the people that have kind of come and gone. And with the Thoroughbred Daily News, you were kind of on like the, kind of a groundbreaking thing. There's a lot of daily electronic feeds now that you can get, but the TDM was one of the first that I can remember where you could get daily updates immediately on thoroughbred racing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why the TDN's been so successful. They were ahead of the curve, but when everybody else was still putting out traditional printed publications, magazines, Daily Racing Form, printed edition whatsoever, they actually started sending this out by fax, believe it or not. That's how far back it goes. And then when the internet took off, that's when the TDN really exploded. And, it's somewhat of a niche product. It first and foremost covers the breeding and bloodstock world. I think it's far ahead of the competition when it comes to that. But also now, coverage of daily activities of racing and all the news of the sport. And, it's very appreciated by the people out there. And obviously I'm a little bit biased, but, I think the TDN is really showing the way about how to disseminate news on racing in the year 2020.
And the 2020 is the year that everybody's going to look back on in many regards. In every sport out there that people would be a fan of. The one thing that horse racing has done well, I think, during this whole crisis, Bill, is the fact that it's been running for the most part. In Florida it ran. We just had the Arkansas Derby. Finally, Churchill Downs is getting back in action this week. So it's been out there. And other than the UFC the other night, it's the first time that there's been any other live sport that you could watch that wasn't probably Norwegian. I think Norway was doing big on harness racing. That's about all I know.
Yeah, there really hasn't been much out there. And, racing, I think, would have to look at the individual tracks, which there was really for the whole month of April, only 5 racetracks running and 3 major racetracks, Oaklawn, Tampa Bay Downs, and Gulfstream Park. And, look, I mean, nobody wanted this to happen. And at the end of the day, when we look back on 5 years, I don't know if, racing can look back on this and say that it really gained many new fans or whatnot, but it may have gotten some. And you've got these tracks open and the only gambling game around, and also really terrific coverage both on Fox and NBC Sports Network. And I don't know. I think racing probably could have done a little bit more to take advantage of all this. People talk about some things that maybe this would have been a good time to let the past performances be disseminated for free rather than people having to pay for them. One of my pet peeves, and I still think is the single biggest impediment to racing's growth and success, is that the takeout is just so darn high that, couldn't racing have experimented with a lower takeout during this time frame just to see what would have happened? And there probably were some missed opportunities, but at the same time, there was a little bit of a silver lining to this cloud that has been the coronavirus. And, I'm sure there are a lot of people that have opened up betting accounts and, were not bettors with horse racing beforehand. I don't know if they're $2 bettors, $5 bettors, or $500 bettors. But, I mean, I guess the jury is still out, and we'll see where we are 2 years from now when things are hopefully back to normal, so far as if this was a plus or a minus for horse racing. And if so, how much of a plus and how much of a minus?
And Bill Finley, something we talked about for years. I think everybody that's covered the sport for a period of time like we have probably mentioned it. How does horse racing get better at promoting itself? Maybe this is all we can expect. I know after American Pharaoh won the Triple Crown, first question asking me when I'd come on other sports shows, not horse shows, but sports shows, is this going to change the whole fabric of racing now? Will racing become like it is back in the 50s and be like, one of the leading sports? And I said, no, I think it's going to be a niche sport, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the best you can hope for it is to be a niche sport. But one of the things that we've seen from this whole situation is what racing looks like with only 5 tracks running in the country. And again, there's a long laundry list of problems for horse racing, and most of them, frankly, can't be solved. There's no magic bullet, and there's no commissioner to solve all these. But one thing, there's way too much horse racing in this country. This time of year, if all the racetracks are running, you might have 25 racetracks running on a Saturday, and that's ridiculous. I mean, the sport is not able to support that amount of racetracks. It doesn't have enough horses. There's not enough fan interest. There's not enough bettors. So what happens is the pie is sliced up into so many different slices that it keeps all tracks from being able to get ahead. So look what happened when we had the pandemic. And again, I mean, nobody wanted this to happen, but on Saturdays we have basically 3 tracks running, Tampa Bay Downs, Oakland Park, and Gulfstream. And you look at the stats that are coming out of these now, the handles are astronomical. Oakland handled $41 million on Arkansas Derby Day. The field sizes have been much bigger than normal. The racing has been better than normal. And look, I don't want to talk about putting people out of work and tracks going out of business. You don't wish that on anybody, but the sport would be better off if there were fewer tracks. Imagine if Oakland Park could handle $40 million every Saturday. What kind of purses there'd be, how good the racing would be there. It would just be through the roof. And, that's one of the things that sadly, I don't think we're going to see in horse racing, at least not in the next few years. And, again, it sounds like you're Scrooge a little bit, and you sound like a bad guy for saying, we want racetracks to close and people to be put out of work. But at the same time, the sport would be a lot better off if there were, say, half the amount of tracks that there are now.
Bill, it's great to catch up with you. I really always appreciate your opinion. And for your fans out there, Sirius Radio with Dave Johnson, they can tune you in.
Well, our normal show is from 10 to 1 on channel 211 every Saturday, but we're not able to get into the studio because of the coronavirus. So we've been taping off-site a 1-hour show. We tape it on Thursdays, it plays on Saturdays, and it repeats from at 11 and 12. So not the show we'd like to put on, but we're doing the best we can, and hopefully we'll get back in the studio sometime soon.
And I'm doing this from a remote as well. We can't be in our studio. We have one person in our studio running everything. So such it is until hopefully things get back to somewhat normal soon.
Sounds good.
Hey, Bill, great to catch up with you. Thanks. And let's do this again.
All right, Kenny, my pleasure.
All right. Bill Finley of the Thoroughbred Daily News and his show on Sirius Radio. We'll be back with more of the horse racing show right after this. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again this week to the Horse Racing Show. Great to have on Dale Romans with me and also Bill Finley. And thanks for your time. It's going to be very interesting, isn't it, Thomas and Ben, as it shakes out on what is going to be a whole new Triple Crown looking trail.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like you said, no one really knows what to expect at this point.
I have a feeling it's not going to be just like it is expected to be. And who knows? Will there be a Preakness? Will there be a Belmont? There's a new set of rules now, a new set of points on the way to the Kentucky Derby that Churchill Downs has issued, which makes a whole lot of sense, obviously, because races that normally wouldn't be on the way, like an Indiana Derby to Kentucky, it's going to be that way this year. And it's going to be fun just to recalculate and catch up with everything. And I know all the trainers are just excited to be back in the game. Thank you for tuning in. Next week, we'll talk more about what is going on and some of the latest developments in the world of horse racing, because that's what we do each week here on the Horse Racing Show. Take care, everyone. I'm Kenny Rice. Talk next week.